Welcome to the RCAP USA Roundup, a podcast where we have real conversations affecting both cattle producers and beef consumers. We're your hosts, Jaden Moreland and
Karina Jones.
With that, let's get to today's episode. On today's episode, we will be discussing mandatory country of origin labeling, or Emcool, with guests Kerry, Crampton, and Adam Jones. Welcome to today's episode. I'm so excited to have our guests, Adam and Kerry, on today. Before we get too carried away, let's have each of you do a quick introduction. Kerry, let's start with you. Where are you from? How'd you get involved with ranching? Tell us about your operation.
All right, my name is Kerry Crampton. I live in central Kansas with my husband, Clint. We have two boys who are 8 and 10. We have cow-calf operation, Sim Angus cattle. We also farm, so we have row crop, corn, milo, soybeans, wheat, hay for the cattle. I homeschool this last couple of years, so there's been a lot on our plate, but a lot of good things. And then we also, through everything the last few years, started a direct beef business called 4 Ranches Beef. So that's a little bit about us.
Awesome. So Adam, what about you? Will you give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, my name's Adam Jones. I'm out of St. Francis, Kansas. I own Crooked Creek Angus. We run right at 250 registered Angus cows. We sell everything private treaty, kind of specialize with yearling bulls, although we do have some 2-year-olds as well. I tell people I'm a feedlot brat. My late father managed feedlots for about 30 years, and I kind of grew up in the cattle industry.
Awesome. So I guess we're really excited to have y'all both on here. So one last thing before we really get into Emcool. So I want to ask y'all, what are y'all's favorite cuts of beef and how do y'all like it prepared? Kerry, you want to go first?
I saw this question and I think it's so hard for me to pick. It depends on what I'm in the mood for, but I definitely, almost always my go-to is a ribeye, especially if I'm at a restaurant. If I'm at home, I do love the filet mignon, and you can never go wrong with a T-bone. And medium rare if I'm home. If I'm at a restaurant, sometimes I get a medium just because, but that's usually my go-to.
Awesome. Okay, Adam?
I'm probably a ribeye or a T-bone guy. If I'm at a restaurant, I usually order it medium well. If I'm at home, it's probably pretty medium.
Yeah, there's literally, you can never go wrong with a ribeye, in my opinion. So I am with y'all on that. So I guess diving into Emcool. So Adam, if you were talking to somebody who is not in the cattle industry, how would you describe Emcool and its importance to the industry?
I guess I always tell everybody it's so common sense. And when you talk to people that are just beef consumers, they're probably one of the first and quickest to understand how important what that is to them, to know where this product is being sourced from. Mandatory country of origin labeling, it's right there in the name. What we're wanting is to be able to label our beef with where that beef came from as far as what country it originated in. I think it's very important that people understand that it needs to be mandatory so that every single time they go to buy hamburger, to go buy those ribeyes or those T-bones that Kerry and I were saying we'd like, that they have the opportunity to make that choice themselves. Do they want to buy a product that's from the United States? Is there another country that they're fine with? Is there a country that they prefer not to buy from? I think the average consumer is very familiar with labeling. We see it on our clothing, we see it on our cars. It's really unfortunate that beef is one of the few things that they don't have that opportunity. As far as the producer side, I think all of us understand how important it is to be able to differentiate our product to consumers. To me, it's really challenging when I'm facing some of the challenges of the industry, just the weather, blizzards, droughts, things that are almost commonplace, but they're also very challenging and very difficult to be able to wrap your operation around. It's very challenging to think that when I finally get to the consumer, I don't have the opportunity to present my product in its best light. And for that, I think mandatory country of origin labeling is really important for us as producers, but also I think consumers are ready and want it.
So Adam, you brought up some really good points, and I want to expand on this consumer-centric part for just a minute. Let's talk about, if I am a consumer and I walk into Costco and go to that meat counter, what am I going to see for a label on that beef?
And I think that's very important. And from visiting with lots of consumers, especially here in the last 2 years, as we've been trying to get Emcool some legislation behind it, What I found is that people just made an assumption. And I think it makes sense. You know, if you live in an area and there are cattle on the edge of town, or when you're traveling across, like in my home state of Kansas, you see cattle everywhere. I think they just made the assumption, and I understand why they made that. But those cattle that they saw on the edge of town were probably what they were also end up buying in their grocery store for beef. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Right now, what we're seeing, go ahead.
So that assumption you're talking about, I'm assuming, is based off of them, all beef sold in a retail location has a USDA sticker on it. Do you believe that the American consumer thinks that that means it's USA born, raised, and harvested beef?
I think that because I've been told that by them. I've had numerous consumers tell me that they just thought that USDA inspection meant that it was product of the USA.
So what does it really mean? Tell the consumer what that USDA sticker really means.
I'll tell you what it means and then also what it doesn't mean. You know, the USDA inspection means that that product, if it was raised and processed domestically, has gone through a harvesting process where there was literally an inspector standing on the slaughter floor, and then I believe at the quarter of the time for each shift, there was someone there making sure that all of the rules, one of the common terms you're going to hear is HACCP, and it's Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. And basically that is different stages of the processing where we look at and think about there being a possibility of foodborne illness. And so those are where we really focus in. And if it was domestic product, then it's inspected. We've done everything that we can possibly think of to make sure that that product that gets the consumer is safe. Unfortunately, if that product was sourced from a foreign country, for some reason we've allowed them to have very different rules and very different regulations. When you look into this, what you find out is that they allow them to have inspection that is similar or according to USDA reaches those standards, but oftentimes in those foreignly inspected processing facilities, that can be 3 years ago. Someone from the United States was actually on site, was actually in that building and looked around and saw what happened. And after that, we're just taking their word for it, which, you know, if you tell the consumer that, if you tell producers that, I think we all really quickly understand why that is a problem and why that should be challenged.
Okay, so Kerry, right now we have voluntary country of origin labeling. So the packers can voluntarily label it with the country of origin or not. I don't see a voluntary label on the beef that I look at in the meat counter. Do you think that the voluntary label is used by packers, by the retailers?
No, I don't. I believe that when you start letting loopholes allow voluntary or mandatory, I've always been for mandatory country of origin labeling. And I think when you start letting people be voluntarily following the rules, people are going to try to make the most money they can on their end, correct? And so I feel like, of course, the big four packers who are processing 85% of the beef in the United States are going to try to make the most profit on that, and whatever means capable of doing that. They're going to import beef at lower costs. They're going to want our steers and our good quality cattle. They're going to feed those out bigger and heavier so they can use that fat and blend it in with poor quality beef. And I think it's really unfair to the consumers. I have many, like Adam said, who have reached out and are astounded, to be honest, as they should be, upset. I think, like you said, Karina, when you see an American flag on something, I think everybody thinks, well, that must be product of the U.S. And you see product of the USA, that must mean it was born, raised, and harvested here. And that's not the truth. And so I believe we have to stand hard, and we have to stand hard for the mandatory country of origin labeling.
Excellent. Okay, so moving on. Oh, go ahead.
Karina, I'd like to kind of jump in go another step further so people really understand. You know, another problem that we have, and it's a consumer problem and it's a producer problem, is we have what I call loopholes and fraud. And part of it, you know, if we talk about loopholes, what we're getting into is some of these voluntary labeling. They're saying it's product of the United States. But the problem is that it was actually sourced from another country, and then they either did some process to further go ahead and break down the carcass, or they truly just repackaged it. and put it in a different wrap and a different presentation to the consumer, and then they went ahead and slapped U.S. product on it. And then we have people that are just absolutely fraudulent. You know, it is clearly product from another country, and they're putting that label on it. And so while we need mandatory country of origin labeling, we also really quickly need to crack down on what is just fraud in those loopholes. I think when you ask a consumer what they think, or, you know, just common sense, what is a product of the United States? A product of the United States has to be born, fed, and processed right here in our country.
Excellent. So now we've kind of identified the problem as to what the consumer is seeing in that meat counter. Let's rewind a little bit to where all of us kind of took the bull by the horns and started a process to reform this. Let's rewind back to the spring of 2020. Kerry, what was the complexion of the cattle industry like that fall of 2019, spring of 2020? And why did you organize a committee to start a mandatory country of origin labeling petition?
Yeah, and I think, as you know, and we've all talked, this has been ongoing even before 2020. And I want to highlight 2019 because for me, that's really where my story, my passion just hits hard. And I think it's important that the consumers hear the story behind why I am so passionate. 2019, August 9th, 2019, there was a Holcomb packing plant fire. And to be honest, it shouldn't have impacted our whole industry like it did. And that's, you know, I've known for a while we had monopolization of our packing industry, but one small plant going down in Holcomb, Kansas in flames should not have impacted the markets the way it did. My parents have a cow-calf operation as well, and they were actually weaning fall calves ready to go to the sale that week. And they, like many other producers who have fall herds, I have a spring herd, don't have very many fall cows, but we're kind of put in a pinch because you put your eggs in all in one basket at that point. You're expecting that income to pay bills, land payments, property taxes, just to keep your operation going. I mean, it's so important. And we saw the market crash. We saw a lot of people, my parents in particular, had to wean calves. They typically don't wean their fall calves. They pull them right off grass, and the market's always hot that time of year. So they had to make a lot of changes, taking that many cattle to wean. For me, I was at the point of where we were about ready to start weaning our spring calves. And I'm thinking, this is not good. I am not going to accept that price that's at the sale barn for these cattle that I've worked so hard to bring to this point. And a little more just to show you guys the depth of the story. And we had terrible winter, consecutive blizzards. And it happened throughout most of the Midwest and upper northern states too. And the blizzards were intense, things that I probably only experienced one other time through my marriage with my husband and even helping my parents. They were coming from both different directions. We were picking up baby calves left and right, trying to get them warm and literally saving them. My sister-in-law's wedding was that weekend. I missed it. And that was devastating to our whole family, to my husband and I. It's his baby sister who he loves a whole lot, but we were in a position where there's nobody you can just call up and say, hey, can you check on my cattle that are in a blizzard? The wind's changing directions. I don't know where they're going to be. I mean, anybody that knows enough about cattle to know what to do has their own. And I was put in a really hard place. And so when we got to this point of like, no, you're going to try to steal these cattle, and I know how much money you're going to make on these cattle. The packers were going to make a boatload of money on the cattle when they got them after they slaughtered them and processed them. And so I decided, my husband and I talked about it, and we said, you know what, we're going to retain ownership. We know that our cattle feed out really well. They're prime beef. They're going to be high quality cattle. So we said we would retain ownership. And for those that don't understand that, basically we're retaining ownership through the feedlot where they're putting on those extra pounds. And then still the big four packers are coming in, bidding on those cattle to pay you a little bit of a premium for those higher quality carcasses. So that was kind of where we drew our line in the sand. We thought we'll wait it out a few months. Hopefully things will be better. Little did we know on the horizon, COVID-19 was coming. I talked to some producers. I honestly got really nervous when COVID-19 hit because we heard of euthanizing of poultry, pork, and it was happening, you guys. They were euthanizing hogs. And like I said, I could not stomach, literally could not stomach the idea of my beef, them not bidding on the cattle. And we were hearing they weren't bidding on the fat cattle, the cattle that were ready for harvesting. So I still had the option. I actually had them at a custom feed yard. I called that custom feed yard and I decided that we were going to go direct to consumer with our beef. We got a hold of a processor who we heard from a roundabout way. I had went to the Fair Cattle Markets rally in Omaha, Nebraska, met a lot of RCAF USA members who were just incredible. And I finally found I found a group of people who were like-minded and who were in this fight together. I wasn't alone in it like I had felt. Anyway, so we decided that we were going to go direct to consumer. We found a different feedlot. We transferred all those cattle, which is risky too. Once they start being a little bit heavier weight, they were still probably around, 1,100 pounds, 1,000 pounds. And we transferred them and finished them out, and they were able to be harvested on site. And then we were able to do the direct to consumer, which was a huge feat. I don't want anybody to think that we took that lightly, and it was a big step of faith. And it still is a huge step of faith because there's a lot that goes into processing your own beef and trying to get direct to consumer and the outlets and everything. But I do think it was a God thing. And then I also felt in that time, the Lord had impressed upon me to start a grassroots U.S. cattlemen and cattlewomen's page. I felt that our voices weren't heard. A little bit after that time, the Fair Cattle Markets rally started in Omaha. And so a bunch of producers were connecting. I was involved in Twitter, and I saw these different producers just being such strong voices. And I thought, what if we get together? And like I said, after I went to the Omaha rally, I met so many RCAP USA representatives, and I talked to Bill Bullard there. And I'd always in my heart been passionate about mandatory country of origin labeling all the way back from when I went to a local county meeting. And I felt really shut down at that meeting. I asked, it was a Kansas Livestock Association meeting. And I asked, where do we stand on mandatory country of origin labeling? And the whole room became crickets quiet. I literally was probably blushing because I was like, what did I say that was so bad? I felt just this ooh. And I was just trying to be more involved. I was a producer that wasn't on any of the committees. I wasn't on the board. And I thought, I'm young. I should be here. I should be more involved. I got to stand up for this industry. I come from generations of ranching background. And I called my friends who I'd shown in 4-H with and everything else after that meeting. I said, did I say something wrong? And two of their responses was this: Kerry, I just don't know enough about it to really say. So I don't really know. And I'm like, it's such a lie. That is a lie. I told my husband, that's a lie. That's what they want you to think, that you aren't smart enough to know enough about imports and trade. And you just be quiet, produce the beef, and don't worry about the labeling. And that was years ago. And it was always honestly in my spirit, like, what is going on with this mandatory country of origin labeling? And I really hadn't heard much about RCAP USA. I say that I live in the middle of Kansas, and it was very controlled of what we heard in the middle of Kansas, what was in your outlets, what's in your newspapers, everything else. I really feel like it was censored, to be honest. And then once my eyes were opened, and once I got to know Bill Bullard and I heard the facts and statistics, I'm like, yes, this is exactly what I've always felt. And at that meeting in Omaha, I mentioned to Bill, I said, what would it look like if we did a mandatory country of origin labeling petition? What if we got a whole bunch of people to sign it? What would that look like? And he had shared with me that they'd done something similar before, but he had my full support to try it again. I kind of handpicked some people that I had saw being really, really strong voices. Karina was one of them. Adam Jones was one of them that I thought had been really strong voices on social media. Honestly, I've never met any of them before. But we started having meetings, we started talking, brainstorming. There was other people who came and went along the way too. And we just decided to run with this, and we tried to do the very best thing we could in the shortest amount of time. And so that maybe is a little longer description than what you wanted, but I want people to hear the story and the passion behind why we came to this point. If Adam wants to share a little bit about that committee or what that looked like too.
Yeah, Adam, if you want to, was there anything else going on in spring of 2020 when we launched that Emcool petition that you want to share that you saw from your perspective?
Yes, you know what? I think out of tragedy comes good things. And I think 2019 and 2020 were really awful for cattle producers, just as a whole, and obviously for our country too. We're going through some real challenges that we still continue through. But one thing that I think became clear to producers is that the emperor had no clothes. We've been told for 20 years, maybe even 40 years, that if we could just increase beef demand a little bit, if we could just open up those export markets, that next turn of cattle, that next crop, we were going to make some money. We were finally going to break even. And what happened was in 19 and 20, we saw, there was obviously demand for our product domestically and across the world. And we still weren't getting any of that product back. We also, with the Holcomb fire, I think it's important for people to understand what happened with Holcomb was that the processors told us that because they had had this fire in just one of their facilities, that we were going to be able to be backed up on being able to move cattle through the chain. And then as we look back, 2020 vision on that, they actually, those weeks after the Holcomb fire, were able to process more cattle than what they had typically been doing. And what we saw is they took that opportunity and crashed our markets. And there was millions of dollars that were just stolen from cattle producers. And when you talk about cattle producers, you're also talking about that money being taken out of rural communities. And, I live in a very rural part of the country. And when you take out even just $1, let alone millions of dollars out of my county, it has a tremendous kind of domino effect on the local businesses, on the restaurants, on the school district. You just can't have those kind of challenges. To me, I think 19 and 20 got so bad, they got so much challenge to it that finally people were ready to fight. And you've got to appreciate that I think we finally got to a point where, guys like me, that I just want to raise cattle. That's what I always tell people. I just want to run cows. I don't, I'm very active on social media anymore. That's really not my cup of tea. I do that because I finally got tired of just getting beaten down. And I think a lot of other cattle producers, and I think some consumers that were opened their eyes in 19 and 20, when we had shortages in local grocery stores, people started looking into these food supply chains. And I think oftentimes what they found they weren't very happy about.
So, Adam, kind of tell our listeners about the success of this petition that y'all put together and what you attribute all that success to.
I think what happened was I think the timing was right as much as anything on that petition. I think that it was an issue that had been simmering for a long time, and finally give it a little bit of oxygen, and I think it took off. I think we've got to recognize that we had some help from the Cowboys for Trump organization, but also I think people need to understand that this was not a partisan, and it is still not a partisan issue. If you are a liberal, if you are a conservative, where your product comes from should be important to you. And I'm very excited that, as we move forward with the legislation, we're seeing some bipartisanship on it as well. But we also had, a lot of just local newspapers took on the issue, and a lot of radio stations and some television programs also. Once they understood this issue, they were more than willing to tell people about the petition. And it's such common sense. If you have 5 seconds to explain to somebody what we're talking about, they're more than happy to sign the petition. And that's really what we saw.
So, going back to spring of 2020, when we launched this petition, because we now have 420,000 signatures on it. And Adam and Kerry and Jaden and I all know that is not 420,000 cattle producers. That is a lot of consumers. And I think that, we launched it at a perfect time when the consumer became really tuned in to food security, because they had empty grocery store shelves. And that should not happen in the United States. Probably not since the Great Depression has the American consumer walked into a grocery store and not had food choices, had empty shelves, those kind of things. And so it seemed like all of a sudden we had their ear, we had their attention. And while mandatory country of origin labeling doesn't solve all of our food security issues, if we can help create demand for USA born, raised, and harvested beef in that meat counter, that helps secure a demand for American cattle and keeps that part of the supply chain totally in demand and more secure. So Kerry, as expected, the petition really caught on pretty easily, and it was, successful. Consumers were ripe for the picking. They were suddenly interested in where their food was coming from and why it wasn't in those grocery store shelves. That literally has been the easiest part of the process, launching the petition. Getting legislation introduced has been slower. So what does it mean for all of us that we finally now have a mandatory country of origin labeling bill introduced?
I mean, it was something we wanted from the beginning. We were writing letters when President Trump was in office. We were writing letters to his staff. And one of the amazing things, like, yeah, we can say the petition was one of the easier things, but honestly, when we started this group, we had no idea how many signatures we would get. We were literally at the mercy of social media, and we had 100,000 signatures in 4 days. To me, that makes a statement. I don't care who you are. If you get 100,000 signatures in 4 days, that is something consumers want, because we couldn't have got that many producers on board, or there's so many producers that aren't even on social media. And like you said, so many consumers saying that they were really unhappy to hear that some of this beef was from foreign countries, especially when they're feeding their children that. So legislation, I think it's huge. This is huge to have Senator Rounds, Tester, all the, and it's bipartisan, like what we have wanted. So everybody should be able to get behind this. But as we know, it is going to be a battle. Like always, we have other organizations that sometimes I feel are fighting against the greater cause. And I want to touch on one thing, like Adam said too. I think when consumers realize that you explain to them, we lose agriculture in this country. That is the heart and foundation of the United States of America. And if you want your school systems to thrive, even inner city schools, agriculture has to be doing well. Because when ag's doing well, I'll say it's the best thing you can invest in is agriculture and your producers of crops and cattle, because when we're doing good, we're reinvesting. Everything goes back into the industry almost always. We're buying newer equipment, we're upgrading our facilities, we're buying more cattle, we're buying more land, and all that's helping to help our country thrive. And so that is really important. But one of the things we've said from the beginning is, call your representatives. It takes 1 minute. It takes like 5 minutes to get through, and you may not get to talk to anybody. You might even talk to an answering machine, but it matters. We've talked to numerous senators, and they've said, those are tallied. All those are tallied who calls in. And I know sometimes it can feel like, well, I didn't even talk to anybody. They didn't even respond, or they sent me a letter back that kind of just sounds like, what everybody gets. But it does matter, you guys. We have to be a voice, and it's such a simple thing to do, to make that phone call. And now that we have the legislation and we have the bill, it's really easy to say, get behind this bill and support it. I will let Adam to add on. I feel like he does such a good job about passionately sharing about what we need to do to get our legislatures all to sign on and make this movement happen.
I will jump in there. Senator Round, Senator Thune, Senator Booker, Senator Tester. Those are our four that step forward. And I think as a consumer, and I know personally as a producer, it's really challenging because this is so common sense. It is so obvious that you ought to know where your beef came from. And so I think it's important for people to understand, why isn't this currently the law, and why is this such a challenge? And it really comes down to, there are folks that are making a tremendous amount of money by deceptively putting foreign beef into your grocery store. They blend it, they mix it, and what they're allowed to do by having that opportunity to import beef is that they're able to pretty much make themselves immune from a regular, supply and demand type market. If, domestic supply is a little low, they can just bring beef over. And what that allows them to do is they can really manipulate however much they want to. And you're seeing that currently in the grocery store. We're seeing some prices that, as a cattle producer, I find that are outrageous. I wouldn't spend that much to buy beef. I don't expect consumers to do that either. And basically what that is because they've just made this a streamline that they can bring that product in whenever they want. And so we're combating a lot of money. There's a lot of lobbying dollars. There's obviously some companies and some individuals that are just flat getting rich. Well, there's only one way I know to combat that kind of money, and that is for a groundswell, the grassroots movement. And the only thing, and there's several things you can do, but the most important and quickest that you can do is to call that congressional switchboard, talk to your two senators, talk to your representative. And you can find those online if you don't happen to know who those are. There's several websites where you can just type in your zip code and they'll tell you who they are. And that's how this gets done. It's the only way this gets done. How we get mandatory country of origin labeling. So how we get it so every single hamburger that you buy in a grocery store, every single steak, is if you make that phone call. If there's only 20 people that make those phone calls, we're not going to get it done. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. If there's only 20 people that make those phone calls, we're not going to get it done. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be every beef consumer has to make that call. It's got to be ever And once we get that, we've been told, and as Kerry indicated, we've had senators, we've had representatives. What they tell us those are is you call in there, whether or not you get lucky and actually talk to anybody, or even if it's just a recording, what that happens then is they just have a tally. And so they have Senate Bill 2716, which is what the Emcool legislation's number is. They're going to say, we had 15 people call in today that were for it. Unfortunately, we had one guy that called in that was against it, or we had no calls against it. And eventually they'll get to a tipping point where the senators understand that they need to make a move, because the senators want to get reelected. House of Representatives folks want to get reelected. I think for many of us, we don't understand the power that we have there. And then take it a step further. You know, the power of social media allows us to exponentially get this in front of more people. I keep telling folks, and I really mean it, and I can see it from watching the Facebook algorithm. If I share a post on here about mandatory country road labeling and 5 people go and share it, well, 2 of their friends go and share it. And before you know it, we're getting into amazing numbers. You know, we're getting 10,000 shares on a post. That gets it in front of so many people. And then I always tell people, you know, go for the easy. If you've got friends and relatives that you're comfortable speaking with about this, ask them to make those phone calls also. I'm so proud of some of these consumers. They're such warriors. They're patriots. They can make a grown cattle producer like myself get a little teary-eyed, because I've got folks that send me messages and they tell me 20 of my friends called their senator today. Well, that's how this gets done. It's the only way it gets done. And so I thank them from the bottom of my heart. If it matters to you, that's what you can do.
Those are some excellent points. So what I heard was, 1, call your representatives, and that Capitol switchboard number is 202-224-3121. You can simply say your state, and then they'll tell you who your 2 senators are, and you can give them the zip code, and they'll give you your congressman. So that Capitol switchboard 202-224-3121. You can also call their offices that are in the state if you want to look up those numbers too. You can send them an email. The emails count towards those tallies. You can definitely do that. It is going to take people outside of the 9 cattle states to get this done. And so if you have a sister in Sacramento and a cousin in Cincinnati, you have got to tell them that this issue is an America issue, and to make the calls on behalf of everybody who eats beef. Social media, you know, share anything that RCAF is putting out or whatever. I call us the Google of the cattle industry, because you can go to our website and you can search by issue and see the history on things. You can go to our YouTube channel and we have all the videos broke down by issue. And then of course, all of our social media platforms, and then use your own voice, share it from your personal, Facebook page or personal social media platform, and also letters to the editor. You know, write a letter to the editor about how important. It's called the the American Beef Labeling Act of 2021, Senate Bill 2716. And letters to the editor are a great way to help spread the word too. In wrapping up, Kerry, is there anything else you want to add?
How did you know I had something I wanted to add? After Adam said that, it made me think of something else. And one of the things I want to say, we talked about, you know, the cattle industry. And one thing I want to point out is that the poultry and the pork are vertically integrated, meaning these large corporations own from birth to slaughter. So they can manipulate the prices, they can manipulate everything in between. And we really feel that pressure as producers, that happening to us as cattle producers, because we're kind of the last protein that they haven't vertically integrated. And I say this should matter to everyone, even if you are a vegan. Yes, I said that. Even if you are a vegan, this should matter to you, because this is a national security issue for the United States of America. Once they have control of all of our protein, they have control of this country. And every single person, I don't care what state you're in, everybody should care about this. It is important that we label our beef correctly and that we don't become vertically integrated, because we're losing cattle producers. I just got back from the RCAF USA convention in South Dakota. And like Karina mentioned, you can go to their YouTube channel. I highly recommend, if you want to educate yourself and learn more, if you're somebody who wants to understand this better, go listen. It was top-notch speakers. everybody, Bill Bullard, Senator Rounds was there. He actually came and talked about mandatory country of origin labeling. So there's so many different places you can go and learn more about this. But I just want everybody to realize that this truly is a national security issue, and we cannot afford in this country to continue to lose producers. There's less and less young couples like myself that have little boys that are able to come back and keep the farm and ranch going. There's a lot of the older generation exiting farming and ranching, and or people that are my age that are working 2 jobs. Both adults are, and I don't know how they do that. I do not know how they do that, because it is a lot just trying to manage what we do, and just my husband and I. So that was kind of basically what I wanted to say to wrap it up. And I just want to thank Jaden and Karina for starting this podcast. And I know it takes time to do things like this, and all the time you guys pour into RCAF and to mandatory country of origin labeling. I know there's so many things that go on behind the scenes when it comes to websites and technology and getting the word out. And I'm just thankful to work together and bring all of our strengths together to make this movement happen. And that's why we really need the consumers too. And like Adam said, we have the grassroots USA beef page, and we say they're little warriors. Give them a nibble and they're ready to go. Like sometimes there's been points like, we don't want to say the wrong thing because they will just go with it. And I just want to tell all of them, thank you for that. And that's what we got to keep doing with the legislation. We got to all be calling, and maybe it's a rally. Maybe we need to pick one day too and really push that as a group and say, hey, or this is the rally this week. I know we're all trying, but we really need the consumers to rally with us in this, and it not just be the producers, because we're less than 1% of the population.
Adam, do you have anything else to add?
I'll just echo that, if you're a consumer that is willing to make these phone calls and willing to share on social media and has taken the time and effort that is required to really understand what's going on within my industry and the industry of the other people on this podcast today, you folks are awesome. I mean, that is so amazing. I really can't express to you how much that means. I think there's probably other professions, and so there's other people that can understand that, these are not just jobs for us. These are our lives. This is what we do day in and day out. And so I just always, thank you doesn't ever seem like enough, but I really do want people to know how much I really do appreciate it and how much I do thank them. And then on the other side of that, I guess I'm going to always throw down a little bit that cattle producers have got to find their courage. We are to a point now that if you are not willing to step up, if you're not willing to fight, this industry as we know it will no longer exist. And the beef that the American consumer has had the ability to have that has been safe and has been healthy for them and has been affordable for them will cease to exist. And so it's time for producers to really do a gut check, and they have got to step forward. They have got to lead on these issues in their community. They have to help us. We can't get this done without a tremendous amount of help. I also will echo a little bit that for me, going ahead and becoming an RCAF member has been a really positive experience. I've found a treasure trove of resources as far as so I can have factual information. It's been easy for me to go ahead and access things. There's also just the network of members. If I have a question, I've been able to throw that out there. I will very much challenge anyone that hasn't became an RCAF member or is a little leery of becoming a member to just call those board members, call them on the phone, have a conversation with them. I think you're going to be very pleasantly surprised of how passionate they are, how knowledgeable they are, and how they really are after the common good of our industry to try to make something happen that's for the positive.
Consumers can become members of RCAF USA too. And I don't know if they know that, but they can. And we do have a lot of consumers who have joined in the fight. And that really helps us with legislation. I mean, there's been a lot of things done behind just trying to get this bill written up right and how it should be, because we do not want a bill written up the wrong way. And so there's a lot of work that's been done by committee members, and they need your support just like anybody does. We're small in numbers, but I say we're mighty, right? So I just wanted to add that in, and then thank you guys one more time.
So that's a great point. So you can go to the RCAF website. It's www.r-cafusa.com and click that membership tab on the top. Producers, consumers can all become members.
Well, this has been great, and I'm so glad y'all got to come on here and sit and talk with us about something so important to the industry right now. Thank you for being on here and for your work in the cattle industry. Cattle producers, beef consumers, we need Emcool. So make your calls to your senators and representatives. That Capitol Switchboard phone number is 202-224-3121. If you call that number, they will direct you to your legislators. And that Senate bill number is 2716. Google your senators' names, find their emails, because if you email them, that counts too. So make them hear you, make it known that you want mandatory country of origin labeling. You can find all the information on Emcool when you visit our website, www.r-cafusa.com. Thank you for joining us today, and as always, follow us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube at rcafusa. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the R-CAF USA Roundup. To learn more about R-CAF USA, visit our website, www.r-cafusa.com.